Hi, everyone, and welcome to the July edition of the Economist Intelligence Unit's Global Outlook video. My name is Agathe Demarais, and I'm the Global Forecasting Director at EIU. I'm joined today by Kate Parker, a senior analyst in our Europe team based in London. And today we're going to discuss the state of the UK economy and how it is faring compared to G20 economies. So, Kate, the first question for you, scene-setting question, how is the UK economy doing?
Oh, well, thank you, Agathe. Well, I think the bottom line is that it's a bit of a mixed bag. So we've just had figures for April for GDP and inflation. And on the one hand, we have inflation that's falling, which is good news, but it's still pretty high, just under 9%, which is above average levels in Europe and in many other sort of major economies. And then we have GDP, which grew in April, but only marginally. So I think overall we have this picture of an economy that is avoiding recession. But I think when you look at the numbers, we're talking about really weak growth. And by that, I mean sort of 0.1%, 0.2%. So I guess the main takeaway is that, we should be relieved that we're not in this deep recession. But I don't think certainly the growth numbers are anything really to shout about. And I wanted to sort of touch on inflation very, very quickly because it's interesting that we've seen inflation come down really quite sharply in April. It fell from over 10% in March to 8.7% in April, but it's really sort of spooked financial markets who expected inflation to be falling more rapidly by now. And what we've seen is that gilt yields, so that's essentially yields on super safe government bonds, have really shot up. And essentially that has filtered through and has implications for mortgages because lenders use gilt yields to price mortgages. So we've seen a bit of volatility, but essentially a bit of a mixed bag.
And so actually that leads me to my second question for you. What does that mean for policymaking in a nutshell?
Sure. Well, I think it puts the government and the Bank of England in particular in a very tricky position. So on the one hand, they're trying to get the economy growing more strongly, but at the same time, we have inflation that's still really quite high. And that's really the crux of it. The Bank of England really does need to reduce inflation more rapidly. So I think what we will see is the Bank of England continuing to raise interest rates, certainly into the third quarter and potentially even the fourth quarter. The government has kind of got its hands tied in terms of fiscal policy because it has a rather large budget deficit, which needs to also reduce. So it's not really like they can sort of supercharge growth through fiscal stimulus. So I think, I guess the main takeaway is that Bank of England and the government will both be fairly sort of conservative, fairly cautious. So we're not going to see much of a stimulus to growth coming either from monetary policy or from fiscal policy.
Well, I would say this dilemma for central banks sounds very similar to the dilemma for the central banks of other G20 countries. How is the UK faring compared to other advanced economies?
Well, I think it's a very interesting comparison, looking to see how other major economies are faring. Broadly speaking, we have seen similar trends elsewhere. So we've seen higher inflation and lower growth, but generally it hasn't been quite as pronounced as it has been in the UK and the rest of Europe. We've just seen overall Q1 data come out for the G20, so that's the world's largest 20 economies, and it is much stronger. It's just under 1% in the first quarter, and if you compare that with the UK, which grew only marginally. So essentially, it's a bit of a better picture for other economies. Part of that is we see some Asian economies that are growing more strongly, and that does lift the G20 figure. They exited COVID restrictions much later than the rest of the world, and so we are seeing a bit of a cyclical upturn, which is helping growth. But overall, the UK is faring quite badly. Not the worst. It's worth noting that Germany wins that particular prize. Its economy is in recession, and it's almost certainly going to be the weakest performer of the major European economies this year.
Yes, and indeed, our latest forecast at the EAU for German economy is that Germany will post a 0.2% recession this year. Well, thanks so much, Kate, for all of your insights, and thanks to all of you for watching us today. See you next month. Goodbye.